Welcome back to another edition of the Saturday to Sunday Football Podcast. I am Paul Perticchese, and thank you for joining me as always. Here at Saturday to Sunday, we continue to recap all things from the 2022 NFL Draft, and we are really excited tonight to be joined by one of the best in the business. It is Emory Hunt of Football Gameplan and so many other great places he provides his great content. Emory, welcome back to the Saturday to Sunday Football Podcast. It has been way too long since we had the ability to get you on here.
Now, I appreciate you guys bringing me on, man. It's always a pleasure.
Absolutely. So tonight I thought I loved listening to you break down some of the under the radar guys, the small school guys, and I feel like nobody champions for them more to give them their due and give them their shot than you. So we thought it would be a great time to bring you on to kind of let our listeners know who are the top UDFA from the offensive skill positions that they really should be keeping an eye on when training camps open up, in probably about 5 or 6 weeks from now. So let's just jump right into it. Start the running back position. A couple of guys that, I'll give you a list of intriguing guys that I see, and maybe you pick out a couple that are your favorite. Abram Smith went to the New Orleans Saints. Kennedy Brooks to the Eagles. Ja'Shawn Corbin to the Giants. Jerrion Ely to Kansas City. Sincere McCormick to Las Vegas. And Devontae Price went to the Indianapolis Colts. From that group, is there a couple that really stand out that you're really intrigued about the landing spot, the talent, the opportunity, and maybe these guys really get an opportunity to make some noise in training camp and then hopefully down the line in the season or even next year?
Ja'Shawn Corbin sticks out initially because he's someone that, he was my number one running back going into the draft class, and big fan of what he brings to the table. He had a really good week at the East West Shrine Bowl. I was shocked to see him go undrafted, but I'm pretty sure it's probably medical. But his situation with New York yields itself to him being able to make the team because I feel like he can vie for that number 2 job behind Saquon Barkley. They bring in Matt Breida. We know he tends to be a little bit banged up, so you don't know how often he's going to be out there for his services. But if that's the case, a guy like Corbin has an inside track to really seize control of that role, especially considering he has value as a kickoff and also punt returner. More so as a kickoff returner. I know during minicamp and OTA, while I was out there, he was getting reps at punt returner as well, just getting familiar with catching punts. But he is able to return kickoffs. But I feel like him as a RB2 is a great situation for him, especially when you think about his skill set and how it's paired up with Saquon Barkley's skill set. So if Barkley needs a breather, you don't really lose any significant, ability from a pass catching perspective, from an elusiveness perspective with Corbin out there on the field. So I think that's a good fit for him. And the Sincere McCormick fit in Vegas is intriguing because Vegas also drafted Zamir White, and we know they have Josh Jacobs already on the roster. We know they're not going to pick up his 5th-year option. So for me, with Zamir White being a drafted guy, I see him being the leadoff back, in my opinion. So someone like Sincere McCormick, who also should have been drafted, in my opinion, you talk about 2 years ago, he led the nation in rushing. So I find that fit intriguing because, as an undrafted free agent, you can go pick your spot. I'm interested to see why he chose that spot. So we'll just have to see it play out, during the preseason.
Yeah, I mean, those are two great things. Corbin and McCormick are guys. I was right there with you. I was surprised that they weren't day 3 picks for teams in the draft, but they got to kind of pick and choose their spots. And I think that could end up rewarding them in the long run based on what else is on the depth chart there. I know I heard you mention that you were a fan of Jerrion Ely. I was really intrigued by him, his pass catching ability. Do you see a scenario where Clyde Edwards-Helaire really hasn't lived up to the hype of obviously being that first round pick? The Chiefs a couple of years ago, the depth chart is kind of a little wide open there. I mean, I know they just brought back, they let some of their running backs go. They brought back some others. They have some different pieces there. They invested one, late in day 3. But do you think Ely in that Andy Reid scheme with Patrick Mahomes at quarterback, do you see a way that he can maybe push his way into the mix, even if he starts out maybe on the practice squad, but maybe down the line a little bit?
It's going to be tough because, that's a situation where you have to look at the guys in front of him. You have to look at how often they use the tailbacks. And unfortunately, I think that's just a situation where if he can't make an impact as a returner, and they already have some excellent returners on the roster already, So it's going to be tough for him. I see him more along the lines of going the Puka Williams route, where he may end up being on the practice squad, who's now with the Bengals on their practice squad, and hoping to get on the 53 this season. I see the same path for Ely, and Ely is someone that I really like coming out of high school. Was very talented at Ole Miss, and I just think the situation, sort of like how it is. I just talked about with McCormick, his situation just kind of is a little bit questionable. So he has his work cut out for him. Put it that way.
Yeah, that it's definitely something there with Kansas City trying to work that way up the depth chart. We know could be a little bit of a challenge for Ely. Anybody else from either that group that I mentioned, or maybe somebody that I didn't mention from that group of running backs that you're kind of really keeping a close eye on at, once training camps open up that maybe I didn't mention from the list of running backs I got. Do you have another one, or somebody else maybe that I did mention that you want to expand upon?
No, I think those were the guys. To be honest, when you think about undrafted, I think those initially stood out. Everyone else that they were drafted to teams that kind of make sense for them. But when you talk about undrafted guys, I think those were the ones that kind of really stuck out to me. The McCormicks and the Jay Sean Corbins.
Yeah, and it's gonna be interesting because there are some openings there in those, so we'll be following them closely. Obviously, when training camps hit, and then during the season, right? If Saquon Barkley goes down again, Giants don't really have a guy who could maybe be a guy who can carry a decent workload. Corbin could maybe step in and help in that regards. Even Kennedy Brooks in Philadelphia. If Miles Sanders was to go down, what they have there in Scott and Kent Gainwell, intriguing pieces, but not really guys that might be that more traditional early down work. So some of these UDFA guys might really get thrust into the mix sooner than maybe people think, because of that lack of draft capital, but that might not end up mattering in the long run. So let's kind of transition this over to some wide receiver talk. The guys that kind of stood out from my end when I was putting this list together, right at the top was Mekhi Polk to Baltimore, Kevin Austin to Jacksonville, Isaiah Weston to Cleveland, Dontario Drummond to Dallas, and Josh Johnson to Detroit. Is there a couple of those that you kind of want to expand upon that you're intrigued with the fit, the talent, the landing spot, the whole kind of package that you think they could surprise as a UDFA?
Yeah, Polk in Baltimore and Weston in Cleveland are two good ones. Weston is someone that had a really strong week at the NFLPA game. Every time you look up, he was making a big time play, going deep down the field, and also also Polk is he was a leading receiver in the SEC, was outstanding there at Mississippi State. So going to Baltimore is wide open opportunity for him to make an impact, make a dent. Surprised that both guys went undrafted. More so Weston because of his athleticism and how he tested, and Polk because of the productivity in the SEC in a situation where there were a lot of good defenses in the SEC, and he just racked up receptions. So surprised that both guys went undrafted, but they went to great places. I would also probably toss out a Deshaun Dixon of New Orleans out of Nichols, fantastic wide receiver, another good one that had a strong NFLPA week. Um, has a great opportunity there. He's kind of fitting the mold of what they now have on the roster, guys that can go get the football deep down the field. I think he puts someone like Traquan Smith right there in the crosshairs. And you also look at Lance McCutcheon from the Rams, um, another one that was out there at NFLPA game just having a field day. And he's another one of these height, weight, speed guys that I thought should have gotten drafted. And goes to a good spot too. We know the Rams have recently shown they'd give undrafted guys an opportunity. JJ Koski out of Cal Poly is still there thriving on the roster. And one last name I'll toss out there, just popped in my head, is Jaquez Ezzard, the wide receiver out of Sam Houston, who's now with Washington. So he's another one that can impact the game as a returner, a kickoff or punt returner. So he has it in there, but also is a fantastic receiver and one that looks to score the ball with when he has it in his hands.
Yeah, and I think the common theme of all those receivers you just talked about is there are openings in the depth chart on just about all the places that you just mentioned. And we know in the NFL now you need 4 or 5 functioning wide receivers, maybe even more than that, the way injuries kind of happen throughout the training camp and the NFL season. But I mean, even if you start with what we talked about, Mekhi Polk, right? They traded away Marquise Brown. Yeah, they have Rashad Bateman, but there's a lot of open targets to go around there. When you talk about Isaiah Weston, yeah, Amari Cooper's kind of locked in as their wide receiver one, but I mean, there's a lot of people thinking David Bell could be their number two wide receiver. So a guy like Weston might get an opportunity, and just down the line, you talk about Dixon in New Orleans and a bunch of these other guys where there's opportunity there. It's not like the wide receivers on the depth chart 1 through 5 or 1 through 6 are guys that we know are going to make the roster, be, guys that are clearly ahead of guys. These teams have their number ones or number twos, but after that, it kind of opens up the door for some of these guys to really make a name for themselves. So it's going to be kind of fun to watch some of these diamonds in the rough kind of break through if given that opportunity, which we know these guys with the UDFA, they're fighting a little bit of an uphill battle, right? It's just the little bit of the nature of the beast where they really don't have that leash that unfortunately the first rounders or the day two type guys are awarded. But if they seize that opportunity that's out there for them, these guys can really make a name for themselves and find their way moving up the depth chart. We see it constantly. Guys who are UDFAs or seventh round guys like kind of work their way up there. So it's always fun to kind of watch that. If we take this over to some tight ends to talk about, a couple guys here I wanted to pick your brain on that I thought was maybe going to get drafted on day 3. One of them, obviously, a bigger name in Jalen Wademeyer, who ended up with the Bills. But there was also Garrett Prince, who went to Jacksonville, Amani Rogers, who went to the Redskins, Derek Deese Jr., who went to the Lions, and Austin Allen, who went to the Giants. Any thoughts on a couple of those tight ends that, either maybe you were surprised they weren't drafted and then, liking the potential landing spots where they ended up?
Wademeyer is someone that immediately jumps out. I know people focus on his testing, but the production on the field was actually really good. This was someone that people thought was going to go maybe in the first round or at least at worst the second round, but he goes to Buffalo, gives him another stretch vertical option at tight end. He's going to have to work on his blocking, his inline blocking ability, but as a flex tight end, as a big wide receiver, he can definitely fit that mold right there. Prince is another one that I was impressed with significantly at the Shrine game. Had a really good week there. Someone that has a lot of Travis Kelce within his game. A very fluid route runner, can get open and does a great job there. So it'll be interesting to see how he is able to crack the lineup in Jacksonville. I know that's a wide open position, and that's a really good opportunity for him. But those were two guys. And you bring up Austin Allen, being out there at Giants practice, you see size across the board at tight end. And we know that's going to be a position where they're going to have a significant impact on the game. Allen is one. Andre Miller is a converted wide receiver who they brought in out of the University of Maine. We know they want to use a lot of tight ends, and Allen, has a good opportunity to make that team. I know he was dealing with a little bit, of an injury out there in mini camp. So training camp is going to be huge for him. He's a big target. He's 6'8", and is another one of these NFLPA guys that had a really good week.
Yeah, I mean, and anyone who follows the Giants closely knows that that tight end position is wide open for the taking, right? They brought in on one cheap 1-year veteran min deals, Ricky Seals-Jones and Jordan Akins. They drafted Daniel Bellinger in round 4, but the opportunity is there for somebody to kind of seize either a backup role early on or down the line a starting role. So Austin Allen, I know, is a name that up here in New York, is definitely been generating a little bit of a buzz of a guy that has a strong possibility to make the roster and then kind of see what happens from there. And you mentioned a couple times today that it sounds like the NFLPA Bowl is kind of produced a lot of guys that you're kind of intrigued with, and maybe we're a little bit surprised that they went undrafted. Am I kind of sensing that correctly, that the NFLPA Bowl had some intriguing talents that you kind of liked a lot?
Yeah, it is. I think the main reason why we saw that is due to the fact that this was an enlarged draft class. You talk about, the COVID year, redshirt seniors, regular seniors, all of that in this class, so I put out a draft guide this year that had over 1,000 individual scouting reports. So that tells you how many prospects were in this class. And so when you see that happen, you see guys that should have gone, you know, late day 2 or on day 3 pushed down to the NFLPA game. So all of these all-star games were really stacked with talent. And I think we just had a unique case of, those super seniors, the extra year COVID seniors and the regular seniors all coming out at the same time.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense that it was that extended or expanded draft class based on people going back, and I think we're seeing that. I feel like the UDFA class was stronger. I feel like some of the 6th and 7th round picks were stronger than years past, and it'll be interesting to kind of see if we kind of get more functional, more role players deeper from day three and from the UDFA ranks that kind of maybe slid through the cracks a little bit, so to speak, because it was such that wider, in terms of the pool that the NFL was pulling from. Let's transition to end the night with a little bit of a quarterback talk. The couple guys that I had written down were obviously Carson Strong ends up with the Eagles, Jack Cohn to the Colts. Those are two guys that I think a lot of people thought they might get drafted, and then also EJ Perry to Jacksonville. Any thoughts on either Strong, Cohn, or Perry, or just kind of open it up? Maybe even some other under the radar quarterbacks that you thought maybe had a shot to get drafted. They didn't, but you think they have a shot to maybe stick at the NFL level.
Well, it's fascinating with the quarterback conversation. When you think about guys that went undrafted, that also are still looking for opportunities, which is why it's going to be fascinating to watch how the rest of the preseason plays out. If guys like Caleb Ellaby get on a roster, or an Aquil Glass, or Levi Lewis, or do these guys kind of just sit tight and wait for the XFL and go that route? So I think that's probably what we'll see. We know teams tend to keep two quarterbacks, and they could bring on a veteran or whatnot to have on a practice squad, or they seem to find guys that they want on the waiver wire to put out there. But so the undrafted quarterback class is a unique one this year because it wasn't really anyone. Maybe Cole Kelly, would be a guy to keep an eye on out of southeastern Louisiana with the Washington Commanders, who again, another one that was able to make a lot of money during the All-Star game circuit, won the MVP at the NFLPA game. He won the the FCS Player of the Year award, the Walter Payton Award last year. Probably could have won it again this year. So you think about someone that you talk about an FCS equivalent to the Heisman Trophy. He's 6'7", 250. Yeah, he's going to compete with Sam Howell. He's going to compete with Carson Wentz. But I think he has an opportunity to, if not make the 53 as a third quarterback, which seems unlikely, because teams only tend to keep two. They also compete with Taylor Heineke as well. So I do see him being on that practice squad for the Commanders, but he's another one that I thought was going to get drafted because he definitely has a rocket arm. You go back and watch him with Southeastern Louisiana. He just really just got better over his 2 seasons down there in Hammond.
Yeah, Kelly's an intriguing name that should have been on my list at Paris because he's a guy that I know Skylar Thompson had some people intrigued with him. I thought Cole Kelly was right there with him as those guys that could have been a developmental, day three quarterback prospect. And listen, Washington's interesting because they made the bold move for Carson Wentz. I feel like that might his time maybe has passed. Like I feel like people keep buying in, and he hasn't lived up to once upon a time what he was. And I think if he falters, it's kind of wide open there, right? Sam Howell doesn't have a lot of draft capital, a round 5 pick, so there could be an opportunity for a guy to kind of emerge in that quarterback room down the line. So I think Cole Kelly's an intriguing guy that people should have on their radar. Emory, this was absolutely fantastic. I love listening to you talk about some of these under the radar UDFA prospects and just kind of give our listeners here Saturday to Sunday some names to really be following closely in training camp. When you hear about them if they don't make the 53 practice squads, maybe down the line, we these guys get a chance due to injuries or just their play, from practice. It's always fun to kind of, not only talk about the early guys and the day three guys, but the draft is so much wider than that. There's so many names, and you just talked about a draft guide that you did, 1,000 players. Well, it was only 262 picks or whatever this year. So that just tells you the amount of other talented players that didn't hear their name called, that could potentially seize the moment that, when they're given the chance. Please, I know you're working on lots of different things. I'm sure most of our listeners are following you, but please let our listeners know where they can follow you. Share your Twitter handle, your website, anything else you're working on that you kind of want to, just let my audience know about. That would be greatly appreciated. And again, just thank you so much for coming on tonight.
Well, I appreciate you for having me, and they can follow me on Twitter at Football Gameplan. Subscribe on our YouTube channel at youtube.com/football gameplan. They can still pick up the draft guide. Again, over 1,000 individual scouting reports, the largest draft guide in draft guide history. That's at footballgameplan.com/2022 draft guide. And check out every Saturday and Sunday. Well, this is the second to last episode of Football Game Plan's USFL kickoff show on Next Level Sports, which is channel 623 on DirecTV, 597 on Fios. We're on Fubo TV and others as well. Just check your local cable provider for channel listings. And we have a lot of good content coming down the pike. You could also see me on CBS Sports HQ as well.
Absolutely, guys. Make sure you're following Emory. Make sure you're checking out all his great content, all his great work that he's providing in a variety of ways that you can find him and all his great work. So, on behalf of Emory, on behalf of myself and our sound tech engineer, David Nakano, thank you for joining us for tonight. And we look forward next time taking you from Saturday to Sunday.